Hello and welcome back to the VolReport show. I'm Ryan Sylvia. This is Noah Taylor. We are with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network. Different location here today, doing it in person from Tennessee football's practice facility. We just got done talking to offensive coordinator Joey Halls, defense coordinator Tim Banks, quarterback Nico Iamaleava yesterday. Talked with Josh Heupel and kind of got a slew of interviews. So we'll toss in kind of just some thoughts about what they said throughout the week, but primarily we're just going to kind of go through and do a game week podcast here as Tennessee heads up to Columbus to play Ohio State on Saturday night game. It's kind of a rare one for Ohio State, you know, one of the bigger teams in the Big Ten. They get that big noon kickoff, but Tennessee going in under the lights in a what should be a really cold game. That's kind of been one of the headlines. I guess let's just start there. Your thoughts on if that'll be an impact and kind of what everyone's been saying throughout the week on it.
You know, it's funny. I get that it's a big talking point. I mean, I know a lot of these guys haven't played in weather like that. I know Nico today talked a little bit about it, playing in a 7-on-7 game in Chicago a few years ago in the snow before he arrived here, obviously. But, you know, you look at some of these rosters, and obviously I don't have Ohio State's pulled up in front of me, but we know Tennessee's well enough. And you know, a lot of these guys are from the South anyway, even the Ohio State roster. And in Ohio State, this is new to everybody playing this late in the year. So even those guys don't have a ton of experience playing in late December either. So I do think what Nico got up there and said a few moments ago about, you know, maybe this is something more that the media is focused on than they have. I think there's probably truth to that. Josh Heupel's a guy we know from South Dakota. He joked yesterday that it's June in South Dakota with that kind of weather. So he's obviously a guy that probably has much more experience being in this kind of weather. So maybe it's a little bit easier for him as the head coach, face of the program, to maybe downplay it to his players. But I really don't know how much of a factor it'll be. I don't know. I think it's hard to say if it will, but I think if anything, it's going to affect both teams, or it's going to not affect either team. So I think that's kind of maybe the direction it's going to head in. But yeah, it'll certainly be cold. Now I'm certainly glad that we'll be indoors.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the biggest point. I don't think it's an advantage for either team. Yeah. I don't think it's an advantage for Ohio State that it's going to be cold because they're from there. Like you said, a lot of their players are going to be guys from Florida or whatever. But I mean, it's been cold here. It's not like it's been warm in Knoxville today. Hasn't been too bad, but you know, throughout the week it was snowing last week. They just played at Vanderbilt where it was frigid. So I don't see it making much of an impact. I don't think that'll be maybe why Tennessee loses or wins a game in Columbus is the weather. I think if they do lose, it'll be because of what Ohio State does in the field, which starts a lot with their defense and how good they've been, probably statistically the best defense in the country, and Tennessee maybe right behind them. So just what type of challenges does this defense present, and how do you feel like Tennessee will handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting timing because, you know, today you mentioned Joey Halsley, a guy we got to talk to, I think maybe since the first time since fall camp. You know, it's been certainly a while, but he talked about it in there. This is a Tennessee offense that's gotten better as the year's gone on. You know, I think we were talking maybe after that Georgia game when they didn't score in the second half that maybe Tennessee's offense just is what it is. But then they go and, you know, obviously they beat UTEP, but then you see some growth in that Vanderbilt game and how they played. So I think if that continues, and the biggest key, honestly, has been we know Dylan Sampson's good. We know Nico's grown. It's been the offensive line playing better, too. I mean, there were times this year where Nico, some of his struggles were the fact he just wasn't getting a lot of time to throw the ball. And for a guy that's still a young player that hasn't played a lot of football, he was having to make decisions really quick and looked like a freshman doing that because he was getting chased around. So I think that's going to be the biggest key for Tennessee is can they continue that growth up front and protect him? Because I think you're going to get a lot out of Dylan Sampson. I think you're going to see Nico kind of continue to grow like he did since that Georgia game and really since that Alabama game. I think you could really pinpoint it as his turning point was that come from behind win there.
Yeah.
But I think if you see some of those things, it's going to have to start with the offensive line. Being able to block and protect him, and I think you will see that kind of continue.
Yeah, I thought that second half against Alabama, we saw maybe Nico turn that page to becoming kind of that shine of being that new freshman or whatever you want to call it, even though he's a redshirt freshman, kind of wore off in that Alabama game, and it was like he's just a good quarterback, and you know, not that they were making excuses that he was young, but it just felt like, all right, he's Tennessee's quarterback. He's not just this former 5-star coming in and this young guy, and he's played like that since then. He's played like an SEC caliber Heisman type of favorite next year, depending who you talk to. He's in that mix for on that short list. of being a Heisman candidate for next season. And I thought it was interesting, this was talked about today with Joey Halzle and Nico, was that Vanderbilt game. And Vanderbilt returns the opening kickoff 100 yards for a touchdown. Dylan Sampson fumbles the ball and Vanderbilt punches it in, and all of a sudden you're like 3 minutes into the game. They only handed the ball off, I'm pretty sure. I don't think they threw a pass at that point. And before that, you're down 14-0. And the way that Nico responded and came out and marched the team down the field and kind of just silenced Vanderbilt from there and kept the offense rolling, I thought was kind of the mature response you want to see from someone that you're asking to go on the road at Ohio State and to win a really big game. And Nico at the time said, or Nico today said that, he didn't really think of it like that at the time. He just kind of stayed level-headed and like, let's go out and let's play. But you could tell Joey Halzle maybe thought a little bit that that kind of summarized the growth that he's had this season, and that is an entire team kind of atmosphere too. I think for the offense is Joey said that he called down after the 14-0 deficit and just kind of wanted to get a check. He's one of the guys that's up in the booth, so he wanted to get a check on the sideline, like, how are the guys doing? What's the mentality? What's the energy? And the response he got was just like, dude, like, you couldn't tell that they're down 14-0. Like, it's fine. Tennessee's fine. They're going to be okay. And they felt confident they were going to win the game, which they did. Big part of that too, Dylan Sampson, as you mentioned. The running back room takes some hits in the portal with Khalifa Keith, Cameron Seldon out, but you still have Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop. The wide receiver room takes some hits to guys like Caleb Webb, Chaz Nimrod, Nathan Leacock, but they still have some guys in the room. You worried at all about the depth that Tennessee has on offense right now with some of the guys entering the portal?
Yeah, I think a little bit, more so in the running backs room, just because, God forbid something happens to Dylan Sampson and you're down to what Peyton Lewis, who's shown flashes and has played really well. But I think listening today, that receiver room, you could say the same thing. But I think today Joey Halzle talked about Mike Matthews, a guy that I think everybody's been kind of clamoring for. What's his role going to be here late in the year? Is he going to approach us like he's still a freshman? And Joey Halzle was just confident, very emphatic with we expect him to play a role in this playoff game. I think the way he said that, there seems to be a little bit of confidence there in what he's able to do. Hey, he had a really good Vanderbilt game too, or kind of a grow-up game for him as well. So, and Tennessee's had to do that all year, really. I mean, they've kind of benefited from, having at certain points of this year, not so much at running back because they've had, Dylan Sampson's been the guy throughout, but receiving room, that Mississippi State game, you lost Nico Iamaleava and you lost Dante Thornton. You've had to turn at different points, maybe not to the extent they may have to on Saturday in that receiving room, but you've had to turn at different points with some guys out. And Mike Matthews is one of those that took a leap, I think, against Vanderbilt, and I think you'll see that continue. But I think right now, in terms of depth, I don't know if it changes so much the running back room because the guys that are here obviously are the ones that have been getting most of the carries anyway. Dylan Sampson obviously leading the way, but then Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop have kind of been your 1, 2, 3 anyway, with that two spot kind of interchanging with Sampson and Lewis. So I don't know exactly which one would be maybe the biggest loss or the one I'm most worried about, but I think just given what Dylan Sampson's meant to this offense, what he's given you, hopefully for his sake and for Tennessee's sake, he's able to go the entire game and do what he's been able to do, because I think that's what's ultimately going to carry them to that quarterfinal game.
Yeah, to me, I think it's the wide receiver room that's a little more concerning. Not that I'm necessarily concerned about either, but if I had to pick one, it's receiver, and it's because of Chaz Nimrod leaving, and that puts a big hole behind Squirrel White, who's been banged up the entire season and hasn't been really close to 100% since at the very least Arkansas, if not before that. And what does it look like behind him? On the literal depth chart, it'll say Braylon Staley, true freshman, kept his red shirt this year, only playing in 4 games. And Heupel talked yesterday about how he felt confident in Braylon Staley and that he can play at this level. We'll see what that actually looks like, though. Of course, your coach is going to say that. I'm not saying Heupel's lying, but that's of course the answer you're going to get either way. So, what is the confidence level in a true freshman that hasn't played a lot this season? What will that look like when the game actually happens and Squirrel White needs a break, or Squirrel White gets injured? Maybe what does it look like after that? Do you just go to 12 personnel and keep a slot out of it? Do you go to Braylon Staley, or do you try to slide someone in like a Mike Matthews who's played a little bit of slot, Dante Thornton, who played a little bit of slot last year, but you kind of saw with Dante Thornton last year that it's not as simple as just sliding in and it's a snap of a finger as Dante looks a lot better this year, that he doesn't have to focus on both
Right.
things. So
Yeah.
do you even want to try to put that on a guy like Mike Matthews,
Yeah.
played so young in his career? I think that's where the questions arise, is what do you do at the slot position if Squirrel White does have something happen and does re-aggravate something or need a break, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I don't think it's a game-changing question, but I do think it's something that could be worth noting, and maybe could impact the game in some shape or form. Where I think Tennessee is the weakest in depth right now, though, flipping the page to the defense side of the ball. Linebacker, Keenan Peely obviously been out for the season for a while. Jalen Smith, though, entering the transfer portal. So you have your two starters, and Jeremiah Thielander, Arian Carter. Behind them, you have Caleb Perry, who's played a good amount. Edwin Spillman, who another guy who will be a redshirt freshman next year, but a true freshman this year. So he hasn't played a lot. He's been injured a lot of the year. He should be good to go and played a role in that Vanderbilt game. Behind that, you don't have much. Is that a concern there, a linebacker?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is, and it's something obviously they had to deal with last year too, and early throughout the year. And it's kind of funny with Edwin Spillman. I know he gets in that Vanderbilt game, but there were kind of times this year where I think we thought, would we see him at all the rest of the season, because it felt like the depth was okay there, even after they lose Keenan Peely. But you're right, the Jalen Smith loss is massive. That's been a good, obviously one of the stronger positions on the defense. With those Aaron Carter, Jeremiah Thielander, since Peely's been out. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a little bit of concern there. How is Spillman going to look? James Banks yesterday. That's a callback.
Tim Banks?
Yeah, Tim Banks. Sorry, gosh, I named two former Tennessee players there, and not the right guy. Tim Banks yesterday, talked about how he was confident in him. Aaron Carter talked about how he was confident in him too. We're going to see. I mean, they're going to have to call on him and obviously use him a lot more than probably expected, and certainly in the biggest game Tennessee's played in 25 years. So it's a lot to put on him and really that linebacking core as a whole, because again, it's all together a pretty young unit. But I do think there is some concern there, certainly.
Now, what's Tennessee going to have to do against that trio of receivers? I mean, the offense hasn't been the best for Ohio State. You saw that against Michigan, where they really couldn't get much going, but you do have to respect what that trio of receivers have done. Do you like that matchup on paper for Tennessee still, with the two cornerbacks that Tennessee has that have been playing at a really high level, with Boo Carter, who's coming along really strong at the star, and then the two veteran safeties? Is that still maybe an advantage, you think, for Tennessee, or does that scare you a little bit that they have three guys that have been that productive?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Boo Carter there. Obviously a guy that's played really, really well as a freshman this year. And then Jermon McCoy, Ricky Gibson, mentioned them too. I mean, two of the best cornerback duos in the SEC, and two of the best in the year. I think you got to trust that those guys will play well, be ready for that challenge. I know yesterday we talked to Jermon McCoy, and somebody asked him, it might have been you, I can't remember, but it was about the what offense, what receiving core they faced this season in SEC play that maybe matches up most like the trio Ohio State has. And he mentioned Alabama, and obviously that's a solid wide receiving core. Ryan Williams, Jermon McCoy had a really successful day in that game, had a game-changing pick. I feel pretty good about how those guys are going to play going up against those three. I think that they've, it's kind of one of those, they've kind of put you in a situation where you're like, they'll have to prove me otherwise, I guess. But going into it, they haven't. I'm trying to think back at some of the offenses they faced this year. I know Jermod mentioned Alabama. That's probably the best receiving core that they've played against. Obviously, NC State had a pretty solid playmaker there as well. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because I think this will be the best trio or receiving core they faced this season. But I think they've played well enough to this point to where you got to feel pretty good about them being able to handle that.
Now, it starts up front, though, because I think we saw against Georgia, where I don't think Georgia they obviously have good receivers, but I don't think they're on the level of what Tennessee will see against Ohio State or what they played against Alabama. But Tennessee's defensive line could get no pressure on Carson Beck in Georgia, and the secondary paid the price, where it's unfair to expect them to be able to play sound coverage for that long. Yeah. So it made it really tough, and Carson Beck was able to pick them apart and find his spots. So if the defensive line can maybe return to what it was earlier in the year and what it proved against weaker offensive lines, of course, late in the season against the UTEP and a Vanderbilt, then I think you have to have a lot of faith in the secondary in guarding those three guys. However, if the defensive line looks like it did against Georgia, then that's when maybe you start to have some of those concerns that they could find those guys down the field. They like to use them for big plays. They like to be able to have that time to let things develop, but that offensive line for Ohio State also has been banged up. It's been inconsistent. So it's another point where Tennessee maybe could take some advantage of and start to disrupt some things. But Will Howard for Ohio State quarterback, just kind of what are your general thoughts on him? Of course, we're watching mostly stuff that revolves around Tennessee, so it's usually SEC games and things like that. But from what you've caught from Ohio State this year and from what you've seen leading up to this game, what are your general thoughts on how he's played and what he brings to the table?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen, I think at times we've seen the ceiling maybe. I remember watching that Oregon game earlier in the year, little bits and pieces of that game. Obviously, Tennessee, seemingly was playing at night every single week. Yeah. So that one kind of ran up against that one, but we saw the end of it, and a really solid performance. They were in that game until the end. I know he's kind of made a bad decision late. I think he slid with no time left or something when Ohio State could have a chance to maybe kick a game-winning field goal. And then I think we watched a decent amount of Michigan, Ohio State as well. So maybe not the two best things to gauge his season by, but I mean, they've had a successful year, and you got to imagine that a lot of that starts with him and how he's been able to play and the weapons he has. And you're right. I mean, he's definitely a guy that you can't give a lot of time back there. Certainly, he's talented enough to take advantage of that and pick you apart. So, I mean, it's going to be imperative for Tennessee to look like their old self and not that version. And you got to hope, if you're Tennessee, that Georgia didn't give some blueprint there. But again, like you said, Ohio State's offensive line is banged up and will look a little bit different. Bryson Easton talked about that today. They're not really focused about the personnel out there. They're focused more about the scheme and zoning in on that. So I think that's going to be the biggest key. I mean, he's certainly capable of putting up big numbers on Tennessee on Saturday. So you're right. It's going to have to start with getting pressure on him and getting him out of his element.
All right, well, we'll see what happens on Saturday night in Columbus. We'll be there, headed over for the game on Saturday, so we'll have coverage at VolReport.com and here on the YouTube channel for everything you need. Pre-game, during the game, post-game, leading into the game, more stuff throughout the week. Of course, basketball, the number one team in the country is the Tennessee Volunteers, so we have coverage on them by the time this comes out. They'll have just played tonight on Tuesday night, so we'll have coverage from post-game on that and leading into this upcoming stretch. And the Lady Vols too. They're now the number 18 team in the country. They have a little bit of a neutral site stand coming up. I guess it'll go down as a true road game over at FedEx Forum on Wednesday night when they go to play Memphis, and then the West Palm Beach Classic down in Florida against where they got Richmond and Tulsa, and then a game against Winthrop, and then all of a sudden it's SEC play. So basketball season heating up, football season, of course, the biggest headliner, but really everything you need Tennessee athletics, we have it covered at VolReport.com. Links to everything you need is in the description. Thank you for watching.